So today we're going to be discussing array iteration. You know what iteration is? To loop over something. So array iteration, the methods that are used for iteration, they operate on every array item. And the first one we're going to discuss here is for each. So for each is an array method that goes through individual item of the list, and you can make an operation with it depending on what you are solving for. So if we have const A equals to 1, 3, 4, 8, 10. So we want to go through individual item. Maybe we want to go through individual item and do something, or maybe we want to calculate what is the total of every item in this array. So first you do a dot for each. So for each takes a parameter, and that parameter is a function. Just like what we did with sort. Sort takes a function as a parameter, which will be executed on every iteration. So for each works the same way. You have to pass in a function, and this function is going to take, it can take 2 parameters. The first one is the value of the array. That is the individual value of this array. And the second parameter will be the index, which is the position of that number in the array, should in case you might need to use it. Most of the times you might not need the index, so you can just pass in the first value, which is value. Again, it must not be value. You can name this thing anything, any name of your choice. You can call it item, you can call it anything, but for relatability, we call it value. So it's the value of individual item in this array that will be passed here. So first, let's do console log inside our function and print the individual value that is being returned. So if we run this code, you see that it starts from 1, which is the first item, then it goes to 2, it goes to 4, it goes to 8 and 10 until the last of the array. So this is for each. So for each individual array, run this function, passing this value of the item of the array. That is what for each is doing. I told you the second parameter is the index. So if we print the index here, you will see that the index starts from 0, 1 through 4. Remember that array index starts from 0. So you see the individual times that it iterates, it passes the position here. So now, this for each, you can use it to sum your list. For example, let's say we want to get the total. We can start from 0. See that I defined the variable outside, not inside the function. I defined it outside. If I define this variable inside, for every loop, it's going to reset it to 0 again. So that's why I define it in outside. So within the function, you cannot do something like total plus equals to the value. And after the function, you can now console log your total to see what the value is at the end. So if we run this, you see that it goes through the item At the end, it tells us that the total is 26. And if you sum these numbers together, you definitely get 26. So this is one use case of how you can use for each. Any question here?
No question.
So this thing can also take third parameter. So let's see. The third parameter is probably the whole array. You see it here. It's returning the whole list in the third parameter. So you hardly use these ones because you are not in need of it. But sometimes you might have a use case where you want to maybe multiply the value and replace or modify the array again. Then you can pass in the third parameter and receive the whole array. And you can be able to modify it. All right. So I'll leave this way, so you can reference it again if needed. So like I said, for each takes 3 parameters. That is the function that you pass into for each. It takes 3 parameters. The first one is the value, the second is the index, and the third one is the array itself. So let's move to the next one. The next one we are going to discuss is map. Map is an interesting method. It also goes through individual item of the array. But map method creates a new array by performing a function on each of the array elements. So unlike for each doesn't create a new array, it just goes over it. And that is it. But map, we go over it and do some modification and return a new array for you. So map method does not execute the function for array elements without value. So if you run a map in an array that does not have values, which is maybe is empty, map will not call the function that you pass to it. It will also not change the original array. So if you run map on this array, it will leave this one untouched. It will not touch it. So if we do a.map, again, your map takes a function as the parameter, just like your FOREACH. And again, the first item is the value of the array. The second item is the index, and the third item is the array itself. Exactly the same parameter that FOREACH takes. But the difference is that this one will return a new array. So you have to assign it into a variable. So const b equals to something like this. And your map function must return the new value that will be used to replace this. If you don't want to do anything, you don't want to modify it, you can just return value back, and your b console.log, your b list will remain the same as the previous list that you passed. But imagine that we want to make an operation, say we want to times the value by 2. So from this list, we want to times each of the value by 2 and use it to build a new list. So if we do this, you will see that the list that was built is ×2 of each individual element. Let me print A here so you can see that our A remains untouched. So this is what our array looks like before. This is the one that we used map to change. So you see here, 1 × 2 is 2, 3 × 2 is 6. And that is what it did for each of the items. And it used it to build another list. We can also use this to change the format of the list. We can change it to an object and say the value is this ×2. And we can even add, maybe we want to track the index also. We want to save the index. You see, we use it to build an object and return an object. So when you return an object, your new list becomes an array of objects. You see what is going on here? Become array of an object. So you use map to transform your array individually into some other forms or make an operation within it. So, and that's why you have to return the new form of that value into the, from the function. If you don't return something, if you just do, say, value ×2 here, and you did not return the result, you will get undefined. You see? So it is the output given by this function is what that will be inserted into each of the positions. And that is why we need to do return. Do we understand how to use map?
Yes.
Cool. We have the third one we are going to be discussing today is filter. Filter, as the name implies, filter will create a new array with array elements that passes a test. So it's going to filter the array based on your predefined condition. It will filter the array that you are going through a filter and create a new array with all the items that passes that condition. So let's assume that we want to look through this array and only take the numbers that are divisible by 2, which are even numbers. So remember that filter, I told you, we create a new array. So let's say const C, because it's going to create a new array, we are going to receive that array with a variable. So we say a.filter. Again, filter also takes a function, just like your FOREACH and map. And it also takes the same parameters. The third one is always the array itself. And now your filter, this function must return true or false. The function that you pass to your filter must return true or false in order to ascertain that this value meets the condition of adding it to the new array. So you will write your logic here and make sure that you are returning true or false. You must make sure that you are returning true or false after you evaluate the value and the value meets the criteria. If it doesn't meet the criteria of your check, then you return a false. Thereby, filter will not include that value into the new array. So since we want to return only even numbers, we are going to do return value modulus 2 equals to 0. I'm pretty sure you remember what modulus is and what this equal means and this equal means. So this is strictly equal to 0, including data type. So what this one will do is it checks value divided by 2 is the remainder equals to 0. If the remainder is equals to 0, we're going to add it to this, our new list. So if we do console log, our new array C is going to give us, let's also console log the actual array to let you know that this array remains untouched. There's nothing touching this array, but it's going to create a new array that meets the condition. So you can see here, 4, 8, 10 meets our condition, and that is why they are here. So that is what filter does. Filter is to filter an array based on your predefined condition. So this will return true or false. If we want to return the odd numbers, we can just negate this to not equal to 0. And our list will become 1 and 3. And it will left out these ones. We move on to reduce. Reduce. So reduce also iterates through individual item of the array, but it does something different. So it runs a function on each of the array elements to produce a single value. So it will go through the array, the individual array, and produce single value. So for example, what we did with for each here, that we did total outside. Let's say we want to achieve the same thing, want to get the total of this array, but we want to use reduce. So in this case, we don't need to define the total like this. We can just say const total equals to a.reduce. Now, again, reduce takes a function. Reduce takes a function like every other iteration method that we've discussed so far, but the parameters for reduce is a little bit different compared to the parameters of others that has been the same. So for reduce, the first parameter is the previous value. The previous value of the loop. So let's say if reduce is going through this list, if you come here, there will be no previous, right? If you come to this second one, in fact, reduce doesn't run on a list that is just 1. It's run at least for items that are 2. So it will start from here. And this one will become the previous value. This one will become the current. And when it gets here, this one will become the previous, this one will become the current, and like that. Sorry, this one will not become the previous. It will be the previous value that you returned. Let me explain that correctly. So this one will be the current value where it is in the array. And the third parameter is the current index. The index where the current value is located. And the third one, again, the array itself passed in. So most of the time, you don't need this, this fourth parameter that is always passed. Sometimes we might need the index. If you don't need any, if your function is not using any of these parameters, you can remove them. So I'm just putting it here so that you know that these parameters are acceptable and they exist. So when we say previous value is the last returned value from this function. Remember that your function needs to return the new value. So whatever you are doing in this your function, you have to return the new value that will be passed to the next iteration. So if it's coming from here, this is the first time it's running, so there's no previous, right? If you come to this third one, the previous value that you return from this function, not this previous element, because I mentioned it the other time, it is not. It is not this previous element, but the element you returned from this function that you passed here is what that will be passed back to you in this function as the previous value. Then the current value where the iteration is what this one will be. So let's use a console in here to track what is going on. So for the previous value, we'll print previous value. And for the current, we'll print the current value. And let us also print the index, the current index. Now, remember that these variable names, you can name it according to what your array item is, or whatever you want. This is just a variable name. So remember I told you, you must return a value. You must return a value here. So after reduce completes all the iterations, the last returned value is what that this reduce will return to this total. So since we are looking for total, it means that we are going to be returning previous value plus the current value. So this means that if it comes here, previous will be 0, 0 plus 1 will return 1. If you come here, previous will become 1, 1 plus 3 will become 4. If you come here, previous will become 4, 4 plus 4 will become 8, and so on and so forth. So that is what this one will be doing. So if we console log our total at the end of this reduce iteration, you will see that our total, okay, we are changing stuff, so we need to call this let. And we defined it here already, so because it's up here, it's causing issue. So this one also can be const, by the way, so it's not the issue, because this array will only be assigned once this iteration is finished. So it's not like it's changing the variable every time. So if we run this, you see that our total is 26. Remember what we got here previously. This was also 26. So this was also 26. And you see this one is also 26. So we didn't have to define the variable up here and modify the variable in here. So this reduce helps us to do that within. So remember that function you write here, you can also write outside, then pass in the function. So you can do something like this, function sum, because that's what we are doing. We are summing this. Then you can do here const total equals to sum, a dot reduce, then sum. So we are passing this sum function to this a dot reduce. I will explain again. The previous value is whatever your function returned. That is what reduce will pass back as the previous value. And the current value is the current position value in the current position where the iteration is going. Remember, reduce goes through your array individually and extract the values and pass it here as current value. This one is the current index, and this one is the full array that you are iterating over. It will pass it here. So again, reduce reduces all the array to one value. It reduces all the array to one value. And that is why we are using this, for example, to find the total sum of the individual number in this our array. Because it's going to compound everything and return one value. Now, it's not must that you are doing addition and subtraction like this. It might be that you want to use it to build an object, for example. So, but it's going to return one thing at the end. Let's assume that for every iteration, we are just returning 5. We're just returning 5, returning 5. If we run this, console.log total, which is what we want to receive, is going to just give us what? 5. Because that is what your function is returning. So for everything they pass back to you, you did not use it. So it's going to just return the 5. But if you do calculation with it, for every iteration, remember that this is going to be run multiple times. So if we do console log this current index, for example, you see that 1, 2, 3, 4. Your sum was called 4 times before returning the total. So that is telling you that for every time this reduce iterates through the array, is calling your function. But in this case, it's passing you your previous value that your function returned. So it's passing you that value, the previous value that your function returned. And if you use that previous value to make some calculation and return another value, in the next iteration, it's going to pass you back that previous value again and still give you the current value. So it will continue iterating like that. And you can use it to build up your summation, which in this case, we just want to add. Take the previous, add it, take the previous, add it, take the previous, add it until we get until we get to the end of the array. So you can also want to reduce it, reduce to an object. So you can also do the same by returning an object. So you can do something like return object previous, but in this case, this one will be more complicated, by the way, but let's just try something here. So we're just returning what our previous is. Let's do this. And we're returning what our current index, the current value is. So if you run this, you see here that after everything, this returned an object for us. And if you notice something, you see that previous is an object that has previous, that has an object. I don't know if you noticed that. So that is to tell you that because we are returning an object, it's going to pass this object back to us. And we are going to also use it to build another object. So it's going to be object in object in object. So hopefully it's clear. All right. That is that on reduce. Let me see how long we have here. Okay, so I think I will end it here because we are out of time. There are still a couple of iteration method that we need to treat. So I don't want to rush it. So we continue tomorrow on the rest. So let's give us some tasks to play with. So define array with random values. Use the array to generate another array of objects where the index is the key and the value of the array is multiplied by 2 So where the index is the key and the value of the array is multiplied by 2. By 2 as the object value. So use this array to generate another array of objects where the index is the key and the value of that array will be multiplied by 2 and assign it as the object value. Now, using the generated array of objects, filter the array to return all even numbers. So using the generated array of objects, filter the array to return all even objects, all even numbers, sorry. So you start from here, you generate another array of objects with this rule, then filter the array to have these even numbers. Then use the array of even, get the sum of all the values in the array of even numbers. Get the sum of all the values in the array of even numbers. So, all right, so task 15. Define array with random values. Put values of your choice, but numbers. Use the array to generate another array of objects where the index is the key in that object and the value of the object is the array value multiplied by 2. Using the generated array of objects from this second point, filter the array to return all even numbers, which means you create another array that has all even numbers. Then lastly, use the array you create here, which are all even numbers, and sum the values to return the total.